Welcome to another audit walkthrough video from SuperfastCPA. I'm Logan, and in today's video, we're going to be going over Audit Area 2. This is Section C4. This is an application topic. Identify and document the purpose and significance of an entity's use of a service organization, including the impact of using a SOC 1 Type 2 report in an audit of an entity's financial statements. And we're going to be doing that the SuperfastCPA way, which is diving straight into the questions to learn the material. Now, if you don't know much about our strategies, make sure you go to SuperfastCPA.com and sign up for our free 1-hour webinar training. We go over the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam, and again, it's free, it is 1 hour long, it will save you so much time struggling with the process, so make sure you go check out that webinar. Also, just letting you know, in today's video, we're only going to be going over 5 questions, but SuperfastCPA Pro members will get access to the full 10-question version of this video when we post it in the members forum. So if you like this and you like our other videos, make sure you check out becoming a pro member of SuperfastCPA because you get access to the full versions of these videos to get a little bit more practice and a little bit more understanding. Now with all that, let's dive straight into the questions for this video. Okay, here we are at question 1, and one thing I want to say is we did talk about SOC 1 and SOC 2 engagements in the previous video, so if you haven't watched that, you probably won't be very familiar with what we're dealing with in this video, which is, one of the types of engagements we talked about in the previous video. This video is meant to expand on this type of engagement very specifically. So maybe go watch that other video if you haven't already. At any rate, again, let's dive into question 1. Which of the following best describes a SOC 1 Type 2 report in the context of an audit of an entity's financial statements? Okay, let's go through the options. Option A, a report on a service organization's controls relevant to financial reporting, covering both the design and operating effectiveness of controls over a specified period. Option B, a report on a service organization's controls related to security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Option C, a report that allows the user auditor to rely entirely on the service organization's controls without performing substantive tests. Or option D, a report on a service organization's controls relevant to financial reporting, but only covering the design of controls at a point in time. Okay, so again, we talked about SOC 1 Type 2 engagements in the previous video. We didn't go super in depth, but if you've watched that first video, you'll kind of have a general understanding of what we're talking about in this video. So if you did watch that video, you probably already know the correct answer most likely. If not though, that's okay. We are using these questions to learn what we're supposed to know. So let's go ahead and dive into the explanation to start learning about SOC 1 Type 2 engagements more in depth. Okay, here we are. The answer is A, a report on a service organization's controls relevant to financial reporting, covering both the design and operating effectiveness of controls over a specified period. So again, if you watched the previous video, you probably already knew that that was the definition of a SOC 1 Type 2 report. And this question is basically to remind you what a SOC 1 Type 2 report is. So let's go through the explanation. A SOC 1 Type 2 report provides a detailed evaluation of a service organization's controls relevant to financial reporting, covering both the design and operating effectiveness of those controls over a specified period. This report is important for user auditors because it helps them assess the effectiveness of the service organization's controls and determine the extent to which they can be relied upon in the audit of the entity's financial statements. However, a SOC 1 Type 2 report does not eliminate the need for substantive testing. Even if the report indicates that controls were designed and operating effectively, the user auditor must still perform substantive audit procedures over financial statement areas affected by the service organization, as substantive procedures are required to obtain sufficient audit evidence. Now, I want to make something clear there. We're not saying that the user auditor has to go audit the service organization's controls. We're saying that the service organization is saying that certain things are running okay in the client of the user auditor, and that doesn't mean that the user auditor can accept that and not do substantive controls or substantive tests. The user auditor still has to test the areas that are affected by the service organization in the audit, even with the report from the service organization. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Let's talk about the other options. Option B describes a SOC 2 report, which focuses on trust services criteria rather than financial reporting. Option C is incorrect because a SOC 1 Type 2 report does not allow the auditor to avoid substantive testing, and again, we just talked about that. Option D describes a SOC 1 Type 1 report, which only assesses controls at a single point in time rather than over a period. Remember, in the previous video, we talked about all these. SOC 1 Type 1 report would assess the design and implementation of the controls over financial reporting, but they are not going to assess the effectiveness of those controls. So again, if we want to understand the financial reporting controls and their design and operating effectiveness, we want to use a SOC 1 Type 2 report from the service organization if we're the user auditor. Now with all that, again, that was a reminder about what a SOC 1 Type 2 engagement or report is. Let's go to the next question. Okay, here we are at question 2. Before a user auditor can rely on a SOC 1 Type 2 report as audit evidence to reduce assessed risk, which of the following conditions must be met? Let's go through the options. Option A, the user auditor must evaluate whether the service auditor's report is from a reputable firm and assess the adequacy of the service auditor's work. Option B, the user auditor must confirm that the service organization's controls eliminate all risks related to financial reporting. Option C, the user auditor must obtain written representations from the service organization's management regarding the accuracy of transactions. Or option D, the user auditor must reperform a sample of the service auditor's testing to ensure its accuracy. So again, we haven't really talked about this specifically yet, but what are some of the conditions that the user auditor, the person who is auditing the client, and the client is using a service organization, so that's where this SOC report is coming from, what are the conditions that need to be met for the auditor, the user auditor, to be able to use this SOC report as evidence? Now, if you don't know, that's okay. Again, we are using these questions to learn. But if you have an idea, or maybe if you want to kind of pause the video and think through this, that's great. And then when you're ready, come back, we'll look at the answer together. Okay, here we are. The answer is A, the user auditor must evaluate whether the service auditor's report is from a reputable firm and assess the adequacy of the service auditor's work. Okay, so that's one of the things that has to happen. Let's go through the explanation to learn the rest. To rely on a SOC 1 Type 2 report as audit evidence to reduce assessed risk, the user auditor must first evaluate the appropriateness and reliability of the audit, or of the report. The user auditor must first evaluate the appropriateness and reliability of the report. This includes, so let's go through these things that need to be included, assessing the service auditor's competence and independence to ensure the report can be relied upon, evaluating the adequacy of the service auditor's procedures and findings to determine whether the controls of the service organization were properly tested and reported on, and considering whether the period covered by the report is appropriate for the user auditor's purposes. Okay, these are the conditions that have to be met for the user auditor to use this as audit evidence. Let's talk about the other incorrect answers. Option B is incorrect because no system of internal controls completely eliminates risk. There's always some level of inherent risk, and we've talked about that in previous videos. Option C is incorrect because the user auditor does not obtain direct written representation from the service organization's management. Instead, they rely on the service auditor's independent report. So they're not getting a separate report from management. They are using this SOC 1 report. Option D is incorrect because the user auditor does not reperform the service auditor's testing. That kind of defeats the purpose of having a SOC 1 Type 2 report. Instead, they evaluate whether the service auditor's work is sufficient for their reliance. Okay, so again, these are some things that have to be met for a SOC 1 Type 2 engagement report to be used by the user auditor. Now with that, let's go to the next question. Okay, here we are at question 3. Which of the following is the primary responsibility of the service auditor in a SOC 1 engagement? Okay, let's go through the options. Option A, expressing an opinion on the fairness of the user entity's financial statements. Option B, evaluating and reporting on the design and operating effectiveness of the service organization's controls relevant to financial reporting. Option C, assessing whether the user auditor has obtained sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Or option D, determining whether the user entity should rely on the service organization's controls in its financial reporting process. So based on the service auditor, again, this is the auditor auditing the service organization, not the client of the user auditor, which one of these is their responsibility? Now, based on what we've learned so far about SOC engagements, you might be able to kind of read through this and have a good guess or kind of reason which one would be correct. So maybe pause the video, think through this, and when you're ready, come back. We'll look at the answer together. Okay, here we are. The answer is B, evaluating and reporting on the design and operating effectiveness of the service organization's controls relevant to financial reporting. So that's the whole responsibility of the service auditor, but let's talk about the rest of this. The service auditor's role in a SOC 1 engagement is to evaluate and report on the design and operating effectiveness of the service organization's controls relevant to financial reporting. This is done to provide assurance to user entities and their auditors about the reliability of those controls. So that's kind of the whole point of having a service auditor to audit these service organizations, is to test the controls relevant to financial reporting. Now let's talk about the other options. Option A is incorrect because the service auditor does not audit the financial statements of the user entity. This is the user auditor's responsibility. So, there is a difference between a service auditor and a user auditor. Make sure you know that difference. Option C is incorrect because assessing whether sufficient appropriate audit evidence has been obtained is, again, a responsibility of the user auditor, not the service auditor. And option D is incorrect because it is the user auditor's responsibility to determine whether reliance on the service organization's controls is appropriate based on the audit evidence, including the SOC 1 report. It's not the responsibility of the service auditor to determine if this is going to be relied on in the user auditor's report. So again, these are some of the things that the service auditor is responsible for, or really not responsible for, when doing a SOC 1 engagement. Now let's go to the next question. Okay, here we are at question 4, and we haven't really been able to do this yet, but this is something I always like to point out when it is an option. always read the last part of the sentence or the question first, because that last sentence will very frequently give you an idea or give you context of what you're dealing with in that question. Imagine you're on test day and you are, seeing questions on a whole bunch of different things. If you read the last part of the question first, very frequently you will know what you're dealing with or have an idea of what you're dealing with. So when you read through the rest of the question, you're kind of already thinking about what the correct answer is. So let's go and try this out. What would be the most efficient step for Rachel to take first? Okay, so we read that last part first. Let's see if that gives us some context for reading through the rest of this. Rachel is an auditor planning the financial statement audit of Bright Tech Corp., which relies on CloudPay Inc., a third-party service organization, to process payroll transactions. Since payroll is a significant account, Rachel wants to assess whether she can rely on CloudPay's internal controls to potentially reduce the assessed level of control risk. So again, based on all that, what would be the most efficient step for Rachel to take first? Okay, let's read through these options. I feel like you're going to be able to pick out the correct answer based on what we've talked about so far, but let's still read through it. Option A, perform walkthroughs and test CloudPay's payroll processing controls directly. Option B, request and review CloudPay's SOC 1 Type 2 report to assess the design and operating effectiveness of its controls. Option C, sending a confirmation request to CloudPay's management, asking them to certify that their controls are operating effectively. Or option D, assume that CloudPay's controls are effective since it is a well-established payroll processor and reduce control risk accordingly. Okay, so again, based on everything we've learned so far, you probably already know the correct answer. If not though, that's okay. Pause the video, think through this, and when you're ready to come back, we'll look at the answer together. Okay, here we are. The answer is B, request and review CloudPay's SOC 1 Type 2 report to assess the design and operating effectiveness of its controls. Okay, let's walk through the explanation. Again, that should have been pretty easy just based on what we're talking about in this video. The most efficient way for Rachel to obtain information about CloudPay's internal controls is to request and review the SOC 1 Type 2 report, and that was option B. This report provides an independent assessment of the design and operating effectiveness of CloudPay's controls over a specified period. If the report indicates effective controls, Rachel may be able to reduce the assessed level of control risk and adjust the nature, timing, or extent of substantive testing accordingly. Now again, this question wasn't that difficult based on what we've been learning, but again, we're trying to learn from these explanations and from these questions things that you need to pay attention to. Something that you need to know and pay attention to is whenever you see a question that's asking the most efficient way to learn about the controls of a service organization so that they can potentially reduce the assessed risk or things kind of along those lines, almost always it's going to be SOC 1 Type 2 because again, SOC 1 Type 2 is a report that tells you about the operating effectiveness and design and implementation of internal controls at a service organization over financial reporting. So again, I just want to make sure that that's clear. Even though sometimes these questions are kind of easy, the stuff we're learning in them is extremely important, so you want to make sure you're understanding. Let's go through the incorrect answers. Option A is incorrect because the user auditor does not typically test the service organization's controls directly. Instead, they rely on the service auditor's SOC 1 report to evaluate these controls. Option C is incorrect because a confirmation about CloudPay's management does not provide sufficient independent audit evidence about the effectiveness of controls. And option D is incorrect because assuming the controls are effective without obtaining and reviewing evidence violates professional skepticism and audit requirements. So again, you can't skip substantive testing. You can't just assume everything is totally correct. And that's something we've learned in multiple other videos. Now we learned quite a bit more in that question. Let's go to the next question. Okay, here we are at question 5. Which of the following is an appropriate way for a user auditor to use a service auditor's SOC 1 Type 2 report? Okay, let's walk through the options. Option A, to assess whether the service organization's controls can be relied upon when evaluating control risk for the user entity's financial statements. Option B, to determine the materiality level for the audit of the user entity's financial statements. Option C, to justify issuing an unmodified opinion without performing substantive testing on transactions processed by the service organization. Or option D, to reference the report in the audit opinion when issuing an unmodified report on the user entity's financial statements. Okay, so again, and option C and D are fairly similar there, but which one of these is an appropriate way that the user auditor can use this SOC 1 Type 2 report when they are doing their audit? Pause the video, think through this, and when you're ready to come back, we'll look at the answer together. All right, here we are. The answer is A, to assess whether the service organization's controls can be relied upon when evaluating control risk for the user entity's financial statements. So let's walk through this explanation. A user auditor can use a SOC 1 Type 2 report to assess whether the service organization's controls are designed and operating effectively and determine whether they can be relied upon to reduce control risk in the audit of the user entity's financial statements. If reliance is appropriate, the user auditor may modify the nature, timing, or extent of their own audit procedures accordingly. So those are the things that can be done when a SOC 1 Type 2 report is being used. However, there are several incorrect uses of a SOC 1 report, and that was the other option. So let's walk through them. Option B is incorrect because the SOC 1 report does not establish materiality for the user auditor's financial statement audit. Materiality is based on the user entity's financial statements as a whole, not on the service organization's controls. Option C is incorrect because a SOC 1 Type 2 report does not replace substantive testing, and we've talked about that multiple times now. Even if controls at the service organization are effective, the user auditor must still perform substantive audit procedures for the client. Option D is incorrect because the user auditor should not reference the SOC 1 report in an unmodified opinion on the user entity's financial statements. And we haven't talked about opinions very much yet, but basically an unmodified opinion is when there's not really anything wrong. The auditor is saying that everything looks good, and that's why it's unmodified. You're not modifying anything and saying this is wrong or this is off. And the reason they're not going to reference it is if everything's good in the audit, then they are not going to need to reference that report because you would only reference the report if something was wrong. If the user auditor believes the SOC 1 report is critical to understanding the audit opinion, they should consider modifying their report rather than referencing the service auditor's work directly. Now, we've learned a lot about SOC 1 Type 2 engagements and reports in this video, and before we do anything else, let's do one more part of the SuperfastCPA process called pillar topics. Now, the idea behind pillar topics is as you're going through the questions to learn the material, you will notice the things that keep popping up in the questions. You've seen 2, 3, 4 questions trying to teach you about a SOC 1 Type 2 report and the responsibilities of the service organization, or things like that, or whatever the case is. Again, you are noticing these things throughout the questions, so you take a moment and write them out in your own words as the pillar topics or key points of what you learned from the questions. And as you're doing this each day, you're building your own personal repository of the most important things you need to know for the exam in your own words. Now let's go ahead and look at the pillar topics for this video. Okay, here we are at the pillar topics. Let's just dive straight in. First off, let's talk about the purpose and use of a SOC 1 Type 2 report, kind of just as a refresher. A SOC 1 Type 2 report evaluates a service organization's controls relevant to financial reporting, covering their design and operating effectiveness over time. User auditors review it to assess control risk and plan audit procedures. Now let's talk about the limitations of a SOC 1 report in an audit. A SOC 1 report does not replace substantive testing. User auditors must still test financial statement areas affected by the service organization. It cannot determine materiality and should not be referenced in an unmodified audit opinion. Now let's talk about the conditions for using a SOC 1 Type 2 report to reduce assessed risk. So, the conditions for using it. Before relying on a SOC 1 Type 2 report, the user auditor must assess the service auditor's competence, independence, and testing procedures. The report must also cover an appropriate time period and relevant controls. If it's not really a report on the controls that are relevant to what the auditor is dealing with, then they shouldn't use it. And then finally, let's talk about the responsibilities of the service auditor versus the user auditor. The service auditor tests and reports on the service organization's controls, including management's inquiries and subsequent events. The user auditor reviews the SOC 1 report, but must still perform necessary audit procedures. So, they're just reviewing it and kind of understanding from it, but they're not doing the things that are in the SOC 1 report. Now, with that, we've learned a lot in just 5 questions and through the pillar topics, and that is the end of this YouTube version of the video. Remember that SuperfastCPA Pro members are going to get access to the full 10-question version when we post it in the members forum. So if you like this and you like our other products, make sure you check out becoming a Pro member of SuperfastCPA because, again, you get access to a lot of great stuff, including the full versions of these videos. And the easiest way to learn about becoming a Pro member is to go to SuperfastCPA.com and sign up for our free 1-hour webinar training. You're going to learn a lot about SuperfastCPA and how to pass the CPA exam. And from there, you'll get a better path to becoming a Pro member of SuperfastCPA. So again, check out the webinar, check out becoming a Pro member. And with all that, I hope this video was helpful. If you liked the video, make sure to like it and leave a comment. And with that, I will see you in the next video.